How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
You too.
Is the mayor joining us? Okay.
All right, I will call this General Government Public Safety Committee meeting for July 26th to order. We have an agenda, 4-item agenda. Is there any changes or additions? Great. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Jenny, it's all you.
Yes, thank
Neighborhood
you. I'm
Program.
gonna pull up a few slides here to share. All right, so thank you for some time this morning to discuss this neighborhood grant program and just give a brief update and then also go over some potential changes that we could see in this program. So let's see. So just a quick overview. In 2017, City Council approved $25,000 in the budget for the Lacey Neighborhood Grant Program. And this was just a way to encourage neighborhood activities that foster community pride, engage our community members, and beautify our city. So our HOAs had a really strong response to this. They loved it. And as a result of that, in 2019, City Council increased that budget to $60,000, which is where that budget remains today. Currently, in order to apply, the neighborhood must be a recognized formal HOA recognized by the City of Lacey. And additionally, some other eligibility requirements that you can see. It needs to have lasting and or direct benefit to the neighborhood and be nonprofit in nature. So these are the grant categories that we are currently that we accept applications for: safe neighborhoods, environmental sustainability, neighborhood beautification, board education, and organizational development and compassion. So these are just some of the grant guidelines. Nothing has changed here. Maximum grant amount is $2,500 per project. One application is accepted per association per year. This is a matching grant program. So our HOAs are required to match whatever grant amount they're requesting. They need to match that in funds or volunteer hours or in-kind donations. Also, maybe eligible to meet that match requirement. Projects obviously must meet city codes, ordinances, and non-discrimination policies. And then each year I meet with a committee of people that review every grant application to make sure it's meeting those standards. So somebody from our community development department and our parks maintenance. So somebody from our public works department as well. And we review all of those applications. So this is kind of small, but this is just a table showing the 27 applications that I received this year for 2022. So yeah, it was a great turnout, and you can see there the grant amount requested totaled $60,599, so almost $61,000, which is really a great turnout. It shows the different projects titles, so you can kind of get an indication of what people are going to be working on. There's a lot of stormwater projects, which is great. So I think some of that annual maintenance was missed during COVID. So people are doing a little bit of catch up there.
You can leave that there. I just want to scan through it.
Yep. So you'll see that. Also see, I mentioned the match that's required. So there is approximately $89,563 in matching funds that will be contributed by the HOAs. So between that and the city grants, that results in about a little over $150,000. It's going to be going back out into our community, into the safety, sustainability, and beautification of our neighborhoods.
How do you calculate the volunteer hours on that?
Yep, so that is laid out, I believe, in one of the next slides, but
Oh, okay.
that's okay.
I can wait till you get there.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
So about half of the HOAs so far have completed their projects and received their grants. And the remaining half until the end of the year to complete their projects as well. and submit their paperwork.
And we did go over the 60,000 slightly, but we approved that.
Yes, so we did have some remaining balance from last year's grant program that was carried over to this year, so that will cover any overage for this year. So I did give a committee update at our community relations committee back in February, and stemming from that meeting, there was some interest expressed in expanding this program to HOAs that are not formally recognized by the city of Lacey or that don't have a formal HOA formed. And so I did a little research to find out how other cities in our state and just kind of different states as well, just across the nation, handle that aspect of it, and just to compare what different cities are doing. And so I didn't pull up, I can bring the staff report. Councilmember Kunkel, do you have that?
I do not.
Okay, I've got a copy if you'd like, but it shows the table of comparison.
Thank you.
So I researched 9 different cities. About half of them are here in Washington and then half outside. And about 5 out of those 9 do not require there to be a formal HOA. And you know, I kind of did some other comparison as far as where we fall in our maximum grant amount that we allow, and kind of some grant categories, things like that. So we're very much in line in, you know, comparing to other cities our size and similar, you know, budget, things like that. So it's definitely a feasible thing. So we kind of took some other steps here to see what that would look like for Lacey.
So if it's not in an HOA, if it's just a city
Right.
street,
Mhm.
and the street wanted to do some kind of a project and they need some matching funds to help assist with that, how does one go about doing that? Is there a need for a petition, or what's the process for that?
Yep, and I'll explain that in just a little bit.
Oh,
But
okay.
essentially,
Jumping ahead of you.
that's okay. Essentially, we would have a minimum number of neighborhood, you know, folks that live in the neighborhood that are committed to creating this project team.
Okay.
So they would still be required to meet a minimum or the 50% maximum match. So they would still have the same eligibility requirements to meet. But I will go over that a little bit too. So here I just wanted to also mention you asked about the volunteer hours. And so that is calculated just by following the independent sector's rate each year. So and that's just a organization found online. But their rate for 2022 is $29.95. So I would just look at that and compare, you know, be in line with that every year. So I did look at other cities and how it seemed very arbitrary for some cities. They were just, you know, I think the city of Tumwater does $20 an hour. But where they established that, I'm not sure. So I thought it would just be easiest to fall in line with what the national standard is. So the other piece of it was okay, the draft changes and overviews. Councilmember Kunkel.
Thank you.
Yeah. Actually pull that up. That might be,
Just log on to the website.
well, the document that I wanted to go over. It's part of my staff report.
Yeah, we have it here. Sorry about this. Okay, so. No, that's not the right one.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So Our Thurston County Realtors, for example, they do an event once a year called Community Service Day, where they have a collective of volunteers that gather and we go and we do projects that better the neighborhoods, you know, whether it's working on someone's house in a specific neighborhood or working with nonprofits, something community related, giving back kind of a mentality. If the rep from the Community Service Day that organizes it did something with the city of Lacey to try to get the grant for a specific project, is that something that would be feasible?
So I think in the proposed changes for the overview and guidelines, we did go over kind of those groups or applications that might not be eligible. So is it a for-profit group or?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure if it's a for-profit.
I would tend to say probably not, that we're just trying to keep it focused on our individual neighborhoods
Okay,
within Lacey.
sure.
But if you don't mind, we could go over just some of these changes. So the changes to this document are laid out in red. Some of it is just changing the language to include informal neighborhoods. And you'll see here, informal neighborhoods must have a project team of at least 5 individuals, non-family related. So we'd like to see at least 5 different like houses. Yeah, exactly. Committing to this project. That means they're going to be committed to whether they're collecting money from or giving their volunteer time to this project. There's at least 5 different individuals that will be committed to seeing this project through. Projects must have documented support of the neighborhood or HOA, and they must complete a project team log. So this is a way of just tracking who those team members are. So we've created this this team log where we can collect names, addresses, and a way for me to like keep in contact with them. And then I just added some of these just to be real clear with, you know, including the informal neighborhoods. We just want to be clear on what's not going to be eligible. So applications from individuals or for-profit groups, religious or political groups, projects that are for routine maintenance purposes or any maintenance of previously funded projects. Obviously, we don't want to be funding individual homeowner property projects as well. So we'll be very careful of that. Projects.
You don't want to trim the trees.
We don't.
Sorry to interrupt, Jenny.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing the screen for the document?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No worries, thank you.
Can you see that? Okay, great.
Yep, good to go.
Perfect. And then projects that seek to promote any public or private group, businesses or commercial enterprise, political or religious groups. And then projects that utilize any form of hate speech or exclude any group or subgroup of people. So these are going to be kind of some an outline of restrictions for what projects can and cannot be.
So does this need to go before council for approval or anything? Or do you need any action from this committee?
I think at this point, if this is something in addition that you would like to include in allowing informal groups, then yes, I think that would need to be approved through full council. Is that right, Scott?
So do you need a motion here then to send it to full council?
Yeah.
What I'll add, the one, obviously the program didn't include, I'll say, areas or neighborhoods that weren't active, but there's a little bit of genius in including those because quite frankly, there's a lot of neighborhoods, especially on the College Street corridor, that are platted. They're truly a neighborhood.
Right.
They still have CCNRs, they're just inactive. And so maybe this is an opportunity to galvanize that neighborhood
I think it's a no-brainer.
and then eventually create some neighborhood pride actually. And this allows us to have a new contact with that neighborhood, better communication between the city government and us.
Yeah,
So-
and I'm totally in favor of this. And the only comment I would make as to what you were saying about like the realtors. I think that does not meet the intent of why we
Right.
did this originally. And it's before you were obviously on council, but the intent of this was the neighborhood doing a project.
Right.
So it's kind of helping build some of that neighborhood unity as well at the same time. So I don't think an outside organization coming in would really meet the intent.
Right, we're really wanting to try to reach more neighborhoods and
Right.
create that relationship and have them feel a sense of pride in their neighborhood and, you know, think of things that they can do that would bring them together as a neighborhood as well, just with each other.
I would move that we bring this to the full council for consideration and approval.
I would second.
Great.
Any further discussion on that? You have anything else you wanted to share? No. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much.
I think that's a great idea to expand it. It's
Great.
a really good idea.
Yeah. Well, it was your guys' idea, so. Thank
Might be why I
you.
like the idea.
Great idea. All right,
Um,
do I need to do anything here to? Nope.
All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, firearms update, chief.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Jen.
Good morning, members of the committee. I've got a couple short presentations for you. Start with firearms, I believe. Okay. Can't see my comments this way, so I have to go both ways. Okay. So this came up from a member of the Equity Commission, and I was asked, what do we do with firearms? Well, once we take them into evidence, or people surrender them to the police department, or they come into our possession somehow, what do we do with firearms and ammunition? And so I was also asked about, do we participate in gun buyback programs or anything like that? And so we did a little research on that. I knew the answers, but I want to make sure that it's current. Number one, we don't give firearms. We don't sell firearms per se that will come into our possession through either evidence or surrendered. Generally how there we go. So firearms come into our custody in a variety of ways, primarily if seized as evidence during the course of a criminal investigation. But also many of our residents, as they get older or no longer have a reason to have them, turn in their firearms because they don't want the liability of owning them, and they don't have anybody to bequeath them to. And they're taking up space and they want to get rid of them. So they surrender them for destruction to the police department, and they also do that with ammunition, which causes another problem. I'll get to that in a minute. Also, we have folks that go through various court processes that live in our city where they're required to give their firearms to the local police department while they're going through that proceeding, whether it be a protective order or some other type of court process. So depending on how we take them into our custody, we're required to retain them for a period of time. Obviously, if it's a criminal case, we keep it until the end of the criminal case and all appeals are exhausted. Once that case is adjudicated and we get the permission from the court to destroy the firearm, then it goes into the destruction category. All surrendered firearms are checked, the serial numbers are checked to make sure they're not part of anything that's stolen property, things of that nature. Then they go into the to be destroyed category. And then firearms that are part of another legal process, we wait till that process is completed and either return them to their person, or if they're ordered to be destroyed by the court, they go to the destruction category. So that's pretty much what happens to them. Either they get it back or we destroy them. So this is a short answer. So looking at what kind of numbers we're talking about, in 2019, we had 25 firearms identified for destruction. In 2020, 14, in 2021, 24, and this year we anticipate 34 firearms will be identified for destruction.
Wow.
That's kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at.
What do you think the reason for the increase is? Is it more people surrendering them, or is it more getting them as evidence?
It's a variety of things, cases being adjudicated, but also people turning in firearms. And the ones we tend to get are older firearms that are turned in. They're the old 22s, the old 20 gauge
Okay.
shotguns, the old duck guns, the old goose guns, those
Okay.
kind of things, right? We don't get a lot of high quality, you know, Weatherby type stuff. Right?
That's good.
But if we did, we destroy that too, frankly. We don't press anything back into service as a police department. Anything that is asked and put into service, you guys are identified, the city council is identified. And so we'd like to put the following, like generators, those type of things into service that are scheduled for destruction or disposal. And we get your permission to do that. So that's part of our annual notification to council. So currently in our possession, in our firearms inventory and evidence unit, it ranges from 150, 2020 to 138. Last year it was 163. This year we anticipate we'll have 200 various firearms in our possession. And which brings up the interesting point. There are certain requirements for storing firearms. They have to have their own separate area. They have to be inventoried differently. So there's a different handling that goes with the firearms. So as we're looking for new facilities, that need has been identified that we need a larger firearm storage area. As you have to store narcotics in a different place under a different locking system, as well as monies, same thing. So each have individualized requirements for storage.
Do you currently have room for 200 in the facility you have now? Or-
Yeah, but it's tight.
I bet it is.
That's why we're so aggressive about destroying things. Our evidence custodian, Emily Lining, is very good about identifying items for destruction. And we've been very good about that. But moving on, we have destroyed in 2019, we destroyed 72 firearms. In 2020, had 29. We did none in 2021 due to the fact that with COVID restrictions, we couldn't get to the place where we destroy them.
And then you made up for it this year.
And so this year, we have 80 scheduled for destruction, and we have that planned. We have to go to a certain facility to have that done.
Where's that facility located?
It's on the east side of Washington.
Oh, wow.
There's no Western Washington facility to do it.
Interesting.
So yeah, an officer actually transports them there and
Yes,
to destroy them?
it's a secure transport to that location, and then they're taken there and visually we see them being destroyed. So just to give you an idea, scope of how things break down. Total guns and evidence for the different years are in green, in clay color. Those are the guns destroyed per year, and in blue, guns that are actually surrendered as part of those numbers. So you can see it's a small fraction that are actually surrendered of the total guns that we have in evidence. That kind of gives you an idea of the scope of what the firearms we have in evidence and what the process, how they are processed. Any questions on firearms? It's very straightforward.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop sharing that one. We'll move on to fireworks.
No calls this year, right?
Well, it's interesting to say that. Let me start this presentation.
I know how many calls I got.
So fireworks calls for July through 1st through July 5th of this year. As you know, we've had additional issues here in the city of Lacey with those type of calls. Last year we had a bunch, right? And a bunch of those frankly went unanswered because we had a SWAT hostage taking situation that we were handling last year. Interesting. So we did a media campaign this year asking folks, please don't call 911 and tie up 911 services for just fireworks unless you see a fire in progress or some other type of dangerous activity going on. Gentlemen's bringing in packages. Okay, so as we know, call for service is a call to 911 center, TCOM, Thurston County Communications. Also, they can be initiated by an officer, but not all calls are responded to. A priority call classification, that's how calls are classified by dispatch. They have priority 1 are handled first, and then priority 2, and priority 3. And the time range is noted in military time, and that's when dispatch actually receives the call. It does not show when the officer responded or how long the officer was on scene once they arrived. So let's compare last year to this year. So last year we had 94 calls for service related to fireworks. We were able to respond to 9% of those calls. As I said, that was due to a SWAT call out of the hostage incident up in the Hawks Prairie on July 4th. This year, we had 8 calls for service related to fireworks. As I said, we had a social media campaign talking about not using 911 to report fireworks unless there was a dangerous condition being observed or an actual fire. Also, we had a pretty wet summer leading up to July 4th. So there wasn't a huge fire danger that we had seen in the past. So I think that helped as well. So we had 8 total calls for service. 4 calls were responded to, about half of the calls were received, where no citations were written. As you know, we have to actually see the flame being applied to the fuse and the actual exploding of the firework for us to actually write a citation. That's a pretty limited circumstance. Response impacted by the number of personnel dedicated to July 3rd community event. As you know, we had the formal city fireworks show on July 3rd at Rainier Vista Park. That took about between 10 to 15 officers just for that event, plus augmented patrol for a busy day. So all told, between patrol operations and that event, a third of our officers were there for that period of time. And then subsequent to that, we had a shooting nearby at Rainier Vista Park, and that turned into a homicide investigation that took a lot of resources, frankly, over the next few days to investigate that. It was really a large commitment of department resources for that. That being said, that's the status for our fireworks for this year. Just to give you,
Your media campaign worked. I mean,
so yeah,
8 calls, that's incredible.
so that worked out fairly well.
You know, it's interesting. I saw the fire department encouraging people to call 911.
Yeah, it was interesting. They had one person from a fire district do that.
Right.
And then the rest of us came on board. Please don't do that.
Yeah.
That's not what we want you to do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they apparently missed the meeting,
Yeah.
where we all talked about it.
Okay.
I got more calls personally than you did as a department.
You did. I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
We've been doing fireworks on the 4th of July since forever, right? I mean, as a country. And still, it's like no one's ever seen them before and doesn't understand why we have them every year.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Indeed. So anyway, looking at, we did have 2 calls on July 3rd, going into July 4th, we had only 8 on the actual day, but this kind of gives you an idea leading up to the 4th and after that weekend period of just the kind of quantity that we had of those types of calls. But again, much lower in frequency and number that we've seen in the past. Which is a better use of resources, but.
That's great.
But in short, that's kind of what we're looking at as far as the fireworks calls related for this year. Do you have any questions?
No question. The biggest complaint I think I hear from people, both you see it in social media and direct calls and emails and stuff, isn't really on the 4th of July. It's the week leading up to and the week after. You know, I think a lot of people who, you know, obviously there's the pet issue is always a big one that you hear about. And PTSD obviously is the other one that we hear a lot about in our community with the big military community. And what I hear from people all the time is we can all live with it and deal with it if it was one night. If it was the 4th of July and people celebrate, we get it. What people get really frustrated by is the week leading up to and the week after, because, you know, you hear them every night for a couple of weeks. And that's what I hear most of the complaints about.
And actually in areas that where they're legal, that's not a crime, right? And you're
Right.
up to leading up to the actual 4th is permitted by the county. So, and also with jurisdictional lines, whether you're actually in Lacey or UGA or county adjacent,
Oh, yeah.
it certainly is, blurs the lines quite a bit.
That's the other one we get. You get a lot of calls of how come people can buy fireworks in Lacey if they're not legal to do in Lacey? Well, they can't buy them in Lacey. The place you're talking about is not in the city, it's in the county. And just again, our lines are so blurred that people really don't always know when they're in the city, which is understandable because it is not it's not like it's a straight line by any stretch.
No.
So, thanks, Chief. Anything else?
Good.
Great. We are moving on then to irrigation maintenance and water conservation efforts. And Rick Hood is presenting. Do we have Rick?
Yeah, he'll.
See him.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Rick.
I hope everybody's doing well here. You have to bear with me. This is my first PowerPoint presentation, so I have no idea what I'm doing. So hopefully this will be exciting for everyone.
No worries, you're not the first.
Pressure's on.
So yeah, I'll be going over our irrigation maintenance program and what we're doing to conserve water. Let me see if I can get my screen shared here.
Hey, what you got in the lunchbox?
Some smoked pork chops and fried taters.
Hey,
Let's see. Can you see my screen? you are sharing. Where is?
Towards the lower right, you click on the.
Oh,
slide.
that's right. There we go.
Yep.
Come on.
There we go.
There it is.
What screen are you seeing? Are you seeing just the one full irrigation maintenance? Or are you seeing?
It's the one that says irrigation maintenance and water conservation on with the blue background.
And that's the only screen you see?
That's it.
Okay, perfect. So again, I'm Rick Hood. I'm the senior maintenance technician for the Lacey Parks Department. I'm in charge of all the landscape for the parks and facilities and all the irrigation in the city. And so start off here. Why is it not going to the next one? There we go. So we got 169 acres of turf in the parks, 29 athletic fields as part of that, 11.75 acres of turf in the right of ways, 15.61 acres of ornamental landscapes in the right of ways, 4,602 street trees. And last year it took over 8 million gallons to water all that for the season. To put that in perspective, here is McAllister Reservoir, which is 104 feet high and 45 feet diameter and holds 1.2 million gallons. So we would have filled that up probably 6.5 times roughly last year. So that's a lot of water. We're probably next to the school district. We're the biggest water user in the city. So as far as irrigation systems go, we have 83 systems throughout the city. And that goes from Beechcrest all the way to Rainier Road train tracks there at Horizon Point and Kite Girl at the western border to the rack. And so we have 68 of those irrigation systems are on a central control system, which is based here at the shop. And 60 of those 68 irrigation systems have flow sensing. And as part of those 83 systems, we have 1,257 zones, which covers 20,708 sprinkler heads, 146 drip zones, and then my irrigation crew also maintains all the drinking fountains in the city, which there's 37 of. And so I have a 2-man crew that maintains all of this. And they the irrigation season usually starts mid-March to goes to about the end of October. And as far as you see on the chart here on the right, the bulk of our time is spent doing irrigation maintenance. 11% of our time is doing irrigation startup at the beginning of the year. Winterization is a real quick process, so it doesn't take much of our time. It's only 2%. We do all the irrigation locates that come across the city for the city-owned properties. And then drinking fountain maintenance is 2%, and then 8% is dealing with irrigation alarms. So here we have just kind of our annual costs for the last few years. Just kind of shows you we're fairly consistent with our watering program. The green on top is where we've had excess budget left over, and the green on the bottom is where we went over budget a little bit. So, but for the most part, we're pretty even across the board from year to year.
Comes out of Troy's left pocket and goes into Troy's right pocket.
And so as far as irrigation startup goes, it takes us 264 hours roughly to do our irrigation startup. And part of that process is we go out and we check each sprinkler head, all 20,000 plus sprinkler heads. We check every single one of them for any issues that they may have. Could be rotation, leaking, not popping up properly. Nozzles can be plugged up with debris or roots or something like that. So it takes about a month for us to get through all the irrigation heads and zones before we're operational for the summer. And then drinking fountains flushing is it takes up quite a bit of time. We used to just basically turn the drink fountain on, flush them for 10 minutes and walk away. But in the last couple of years, we've had to change that process due to restrictions, or I guess regulations. And so now we charge up the drinking fountains, flush them for 10 minutes, and then somebody from the water department comes and does a water sample from each one, and they send that off. And while we're waiting for those results to come back, we turn the water for the fountains back off until that we get a clear result. And then once that happens, we turn them back on. So that takes, it's usually about a 2-week process kind of to get everything as far as drinking fountains turned on and operational for the season. Maintenance aspect of our the irrigation park goes, do a lot of repairs and locates, which takes about 1,800 hours a year. We do a lot of repairing leaks and breaks in our systems. They're getting older, the pipes getting brittle, ground shifting, things like that, a lot of trees. We're averaging 56 locates a year. And then also part of our maintenance plan program is we aerate the turf a minimum of 2 times a year. But before we can go and run out an aerator all over the grass, we have to go out and we have to mark every single sprinkler head with spray paint so they don't run them over and damage them and add to our costs per year. Also part of our maintenance activities is we do a lot of valve box maintenance. So grass always grows throughout the year. So if we let it go, it'll cover up our valve boxes and we'll never be able to find them. So we have to go around and edge them all twice a year, every year. We also go out and inspect any city-owned projects that have irrigation to make sure the installers met our standards with the design and any processes and items that we have on our list that we required for usage, and make sure that the city gets a good product at the end of the project. We make sure all the heads are adjusted for adequate coverage. They're not spraying out in the street and the sidewalks or anything like that. We do a lot of electrical troubleshooting. We have all of our clocks and wiring that goes on as things go bad throughout the year. So we always kind of have to go out and check and see what's going on. Fortunately, we don't get a ton of vandalism, but we do get vandalism. So that takes up a bit of our time. Kids come along at night and like to bust the tops of our sprinkler heads off. And so we have to go out and fix those when that happens. One of our biggest challenges is dealing with right-of-way irrigation. As you all know, we're Tree City, USA. And so all of our right-of-way strips are planted with lots and lots of trees. And they're only roughly 4 feet wide. So there's limited space to put irrigation in those right-of-way strips. And then we go and plant a tree right on top of it. And over time, those trees get big, the root balls, they push on the pipe, and cause it to break, or the roots will pinch off sprinkler heads. And at that point, we have to remove the tree completely, fix the irrigation, and then we plant a tree back on top of it and repeat the process for like every 10, 15 years. But we do have a lot of traffic in the city. We have a lot of accidents, so there are cars that swerve and do whatever, have trouble navigating the roundabouts, and they do cause damage when they drive into the landscapes and cause irrigation damage that we have to repair. We have a lot of projects that we do. One, we have to move a lot of main lines and irrigation zones for various projects. Like one, we have the Gold Star Memorial going in out at Black Plaza. And so in order to put the monument in, we had to move the main line, all the wires, and relocate the point of connection. And then out of our parks, we're slowly kind of bringing them up and getting them added into our flow sensing program. So we've added some booster pumps. We add master valves and flow sensors as we do any upgrades to the systems. And then some of our systems are just old and then dilapidated and are really poorly designed 20 years ago. And so the guys go out and we try and redesign them and then install all the whole new system ourselves to save the city as much money as we can. And so as far as our water conservation efforts go, the city has an odd even schedule that's mandatory every season that we follow as best we can. We have our central control system, which is tied into 60 of the irrigation systems that we have, and flow sensing is added to those systems as we can are able to. And then we've also started using drip irrigation in our right-of-way strips where it's only shrubs, which provides minimal watering at that point. So again, we have the city mandated odd, even outdoor water schedule. We try to observe that the best that we can, but there's a lot of times and places where we can't. Our water window is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's kind of generally the sweet spot watering. Most of the sports in our parks are done by 9 o'clock, and it gives people time to clear out, so we aren't getting them soaked to sprinklers. And kids aren't in the parks too late, and they're not causing much vandalism. And we have to end by 6 a.m. because that's when our computer system calls out to all the clocks and checks for alarms that may have occurred over the nighttime. And so athletic fields, new turf, new shrub plantings, and annuals, flowers that are planted, they're exempt from the water schedule. But on top of that, we are limited to watering 24 zones roughly per night. Anything more than that, we can't squeeze that in our water window. And so since we have odd even day watering, some of our parks are so big that even though it's an even address, we have 32 or 48 zones. We can't get that in one night. So we'll have to split that up and it'll water every other night. So it'll appear that we're not following the watering schedule because it's the same location that sprinklers are coming on, but it's only half the park one night and half the park the next night. And some of our parks are so big, like the Rack and Rainer Vista, we have multiple clocks. And so we just can't get that in on an odd or even day schedule. So we have to just kind of water those as needed. And so we have minimal watering on Fridays. We try not to water if we can, but again, some sites like the Rack, Rainer Vista, they're just so big, we don't have a choice but to water those athletic fields on a Friday. Here's a picture of our kind of a drip irrigation design here. So we have 146 drip irrigation zones now in the city. It maximizes watering because they're only watering where the plants are. You're not watering the entire dirt area that you see like we would in the past. We would use spray heads. It would just water everything. So now just using drip, we're conserving quite a bit of water by specifically just targeting the plants. It reduces runoff. And by not watering the entire dirt area, you're not watering any weed seeds that are coming in on those areas where there's no plants, which also allows us to use less herbicides in the city. So, which is a good thing. Here's a picture of our central control computer, and one of our clocks that's out in the field is tied to that computer. One of the biggest benefits of having a central control system is, whereas the city, we're trying to do kind of more with less if we can. And by having this central control system, like when it rains while we're watering, in the past, we used to have to go out, drive to every single irrigation clock and turn them all off manually. And then when it quit raining, we have to drive back out and turn them back on manually. So that would, just to go around and turn them all off manually would be a 2-day process, like 2 full days. And the same with turning it all back on. With the computer, we just go to sit down, we type in how many days we want to turn the sprinklers off, and we just hit the send button and walk away. It's less than 5 minutes compared to, what would have taken 4 days in the past. And with our tiered reductions water shortage response plan that we have, so we always have the odd even schedule, which is stage 1. But if we get over 15 million gallons of water production in a day, that bumps us up to stage 2. And then if we, stage 3 is if it really gets kind of hot for a long period of time. But it's the same thing as turning water off for when it rains. To do a reduction, we just sit down on the computer and we just drop it down to 90% watering, hit the send button and walk away. Otherwise, we'd have to drive out to all the irrigation clocks and manually do that, which would take even longer. Some of the old clocks, you have to reduce the watering time per zone and can't just do the whole clock at one time. So the central control computer saves us an immense amount of time and labor.
Hey, Rick.
Yes, sir.
This week that we're going to be in the 90s here for the next several days, will that cause you to have to go to stage 2 or 3 on that? Or do you know?
Potentially. Ed Andrews monitors that. So he lets us know if we hit the 15 million gallon mark. And then once he sends me an email, then we'll do reductions as needed from there.
Thanks.
As far as flow sensing goes with our irrigation control system, it's also a big time water saver. So it has a part of the program is it's dealing with alarms. And so basically we program an expected flow rate for each of our irrigation zones. We have an expected flow, a minimum flow, and a maximum flow. And we set those parameters for every zone in the city that has a flow sensor. And so when the system runs at night, if there's a variance outside of those parameters, the module you see on the right, it takes a pulse, a read every 30 seconds. And so if it gets 3 consecutive readings where the flow is outside of our parameters, it says that there's something wrong with this zone. There's a break or something. So it immediately shuts that irrigation zone down. So it doesn't just keep running and just spewing water all over needlessly. And it won't turn back on until we clear that alarm. So, and then so once if it finds 3 consecutive alerts, it'll shut that zone down, and then it'll go to the next zone. And if it finds 3 alarms again outside that parameter, it'll go to the next zone. So after 3 zones of it finding, so it'll be 9 consecutive alarms, it will determine that there's something wrong with the main line. Could be a mainline break or something, and it will shut the whole system down. It'll just shut down the master valve, and nothing will run until we clear the alarm. So if you got a 3-inch water main, if it's broke, and without that, it would just run for all night long, which is an immense waste of water. I'm sure everybody's gone through neighborhoods or through town and seen businesses where there's water shooting 20 feet up in the air and is doing that for a week, 2 weeks straight and just wasting a ton of water. So with our flow sensing system, that pretty much eliminates that. When we come into work in the morning, our computer screen shows us a list of all the alarms that occurred overnight. And so my irrigation crew, they go out, the first thing they do is go out and they investigate each one of those alarms and fix anything that needs to be repaired immediately. And that gets us to turn the water back on as quick as possible and doesn't waste as minimal water as possible. And one thing that we're trying this year is we're trying a soil surfactant on our athletic fields. It's pretty experimental for us at this point, but basically it's a liquid that we spray over the grass, and it's supposed to improve the availability, distribution, and infiltration of water into the root zone. And basically it just kind of turns the soil into a sponge, more or less. So it's just retaining that water longer, so we can water less and save water. And we'll see how that works for us here for the rest of the year. I don't know how many times more we're going to try it, where we're putting it down, but I'm not familiar with this. This is going on at the rack in Rainier Vista currently. Other than that, that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Any questions?
So you don't know much about the soil surfactants? Is that how you pronounce that?
Correct. I do not.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, thank you, Rick. Appreciate that really in-depth report. So
Yeah, no problem. Feel free to email me if some questions you think of later that you may have or whatnot. So
sounds good. Well, thank you very much.
thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
I do want to add to the committee. So there are times when we do have to, go beyond the odd even policy. Within the policy, though, there's a specific exemption for the city. There's a recognition that we've spent millions of dollars on ball fields and parks, and we can't let that investment be destroyed because of lack of maintenance, essentially. So in case it ever comes up, it's come up more in the past than it has recently, but I think that's just important to point out.
I haven't heard it in the last couple of years, but
Okay.
earlier in my time on council, we heard it quite often.
Yeah.
About, it's great that the city makes these rules for everybody else and doesn't follow them.
But it
Heard that
goes,
quite a bit.
yeah, it just goes down to we do have a
Yeah,
higher need to protect the public's investment.
yeah, that's reasonable. All right, anything else? If not, we've reached the end of the agenda and we've called this meeting closed. Thank you all very much.